its echo rolling across the empty land like a challenge to the sky. Each strike sent a tremor through her arms, yet she did not stop. The wind tugged at her skirt and carried dust across the yard, settling into the cracks of the old cabin the way sorrow had settled into her life. This was frontier life, raw and unyielding, and it did not pause for grief. In the distance, the forgotten trails stretched toward the hills, pale and worn, as if they too were tired of remembering who had passed along them. She worked with her head down, dark hair tied back with a faded ribbon, her face set in quiet resolve. The boards she hammered had once been sound, placed by her husband's hands when hope still lived in the timber. Now they were splintered by time and weather, just like the dreams she had buried beside him. Every nail she drove felt like a promise to survive, even if survival meant standing alone beneath a wide and careless sky. Not far from her stood his brother, leaning against the fence post as if unsure whether he belonged there. He had arrived 2 weeks after the burial, riding in from the south with dust on his coat and guilt in his eyes. Caleb was a lone cowboy by habit, a man more at ease on the open range than near a hearth. He watched her now, hat pulled low, hands resting idle at his sides. He had offered help more than once, but she had shaken her head each time. This was her burden to bear, she had said, and he had not argued. The old west town lay miles away, little more than a cluster of weather-beaten buildings pressed against the river bend. Once a week she made the journey for flour and lamp oil, passing through streets where people spoke in hushed tones when she walked by. Widowhood carried a weight in such places, and whispers followed her like shadows. The town had been kinder when her husband lived, when laughter had filled their cabin and the sound of children's steps had crossed the floor. Now silence ruled, broken only by the hammer and the wind. Caleb had been close to his brother, closer than most men allowed themselves to be. He carried that loss in the stiffness of his shoulders and the careful way he spoke her name. He felt like an intruder on sacred ground, yet something kept him rooted there. Perhaps it was duty, or perhaps it was the quiet pull he could not name. A feeling born from shared grief and long nights under the same unforgiving stars. She paused to catch her breath, pressing a hand to her side. The hammer slipped from her grasp and fell into the dirt. Caleb moved at once, stepping forward before she could bend. Their fingers brushed as he picked it up, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to still. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just her husband's likeness, but a different man shaped by the same hard land. His eyes held a gentleness that surprised her, a softness earned through loss and long rides alone. "I can fix the rest," he said quietly, holding out the hammer. She hesitated, pride and weariness warring within her. The frontier had taught her to stand firm, to rely on her own strength when no one else would come. Yet her arms ached, and the weight of loneliness pressed heavy on her chest. At last she nodded once and stepped aside. He took the board, his movements sure, and set to work without another word. As he hammered, her gaze drifted beyond the cabin to the line of cottonwoods near the creek. She remembered the stories told by an old native woman who once camped there, tales of spirits that walked the land and watched over those who honored it. The woman had spoken of survival and respect, of listening to the earth when it whispered warnings. Those words lingered now, carried on the breeze like a Native American tale half remembered, half believed. She wondered what the spirits would think of her standing here with her husband's brother, sharing a silence that felt too full. This was a Wild West love story in its most fragile beginning, though neither dared give it a name. It was not romance yet, only a shared understanding of pain and the faint stirring of something more. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in colors of rust and gold. A child's laughter echoed faintly from the neighboring homestead, a reminder of what once had been and what might never return. Her heart tightened at the sound, and she turned away, afraid he would see the tears she refused to shed. Caleb finished the last nail and stepped back. The board held firm. He wiped his hands on his trousers and looked toward her as if waiting for judgment. She met his gaze and offered a small nod of thanks, the kind that carried more than words ever could. The space between them felt charged, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of the past. Night crept in quietly, as it always did, bringing with it the cool promise of stars. A coyote called from the hills, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and glanced toward the cabin door. Inside waited the emptiness she had grown used to, the quiet rooms and memories that refused to fade. Caleb cleared his throat. "I can ride on tomorrow," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or stay a while longer, if you need." She did not answer at once. The choice hung between them like a suspended breath. Stay and risk stirring feelings best left buried. Leave and return her to the solitude she both feared and trusted. The frontier had taught her many lessons, but this one felt the hardest yet. As the first stars appeared, she looked out toward the forgotten trails and then back at him, her expression unreadable. Somewhere beyond the darkening hills, the future waited, uncertain and demanding. Whether it would bring healing or heartache remained to be seen, and the silence that followed her gaze carried a promise that nothing in their lives would remain the same. She turned from the darkening trails at last, her eyes resting on Caleb as if weighing the truth of his words. The wind stirred again, carrying the scent of sage and cold water from the creek. "The land decides," she said softly. "It always has." Then she stepped inside the cabin, leaving the door ajar and the question unanswered. Caleb remained where he stood long after her shadow vanished from the doorway. He knew that kind of answer well. It was the sort spoken by those who had learned not to trust promises, only the slow turning of days. He tied his horse to the rail and settled onto the step, pulling his coat tighter as night deepened. The stars came out sharp and bright, like watchful eyes, and with them came memories he had ridden hard to escape. He had grown up along these same plains, the second son in a family that believed love was shown through work, not words. His father had died early, crushed beneath a spooked horse, leaving Caleb and his older brother to shoulder the ranch before their beards had fully grown. They had survived by leaning on one another, sharing a bond forged in dust and sweat. When his brother married, Caleb had stepped back, giving them space, riding fence lines farther and longer until the house felt no longer his. He told himself it was freedom he sought, yet loneliness rode with him like a second shadow. Inside the cabin, she set a lamp on the table and lit it, the flame trembling before settling. The walls held echoes of another life, one filled with quiet laughter and plans spoken at dawn. She had followed her husband west with nothing but hope and a single trunk of belongings. Together they had built this place board by board, dreaming of a future shaped by honest work and simple joys. The land had tested them from the start. Droughts burned the fields, winters froze the creek solid, and sickness came without warning. When death finally took him, it did so without mercy, leaving her to face the frontier alone. She had buried more than a man that day. She had buried the idea that the world might be fair. Since then, she had learned to speak little and listen much, to measure each step as if the ground itself might betray her. In the old west town she kept her distance, aware of how eyes lingered and judgments formed. A woman alone was seen as either pitiful or dangerous. She would be neither. The next morning came pale and cold. Caleb rose before dawn, tending to the horse and checking the fence line as if it were his own land. When she stepped outside, wrapped in her shawl, she found him already working. There was comfort in the steady rhythm of his movements, a reminder of days when men rose early for reasons other than survival. She watched from a distance, unsure whether to speak, unsure of her own heart. They shared meals in near silence, the clink of tin plates and the scrape of chairs filling the space where words might have gone. At times, their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Yet neither dared cross the line drawn by grief and loyalty. He was her husband's brother. She was a widow bound by memory. The frontier might forgive many things, but some boundaries cut deeper than law. As days passed, the land showed its harsher side. A storm rolled in from the north, dark clouds bruising the sky. Wind howled through the cottonwoods, tearing at the cabin roof and rattling the windows. They worked side by side to secure what they could, their movements urgent and practiced. When the rain came, it came hard, turning the ground to mud and swelling the creek beyond its banks. During the long night, thunder shook the walls and she sat awake by the fire, memories crowding close. She remembered another storm years ago, her husband's laughter as they watched lightning dance across the plains. That laughter felt like a distant dream now. Caleb sat across from her, staring into the flames, his face carved with quiet thought. She wondered what ghosts visited him in such moments, what promises he had made and broken along the forgotten trails. At dawn the storm had passed, leaving the land scarred and raw. Fences lay broken, and one corner of the barn had collapsed. Worse still, tracks marked the mud near the creek. Not deer or elk, but horses, shod and moving fast. Caleb studied them closely, his jaw tightening. The frontier carried dangers beyond weather and hunger. Men desperate or cruel enough to take what little others had carved from the wild were never far. "We should be careful," he said. "This land draws trouble when folks think no one's watching." She nodded, fear stirring in her chest. She had heard stories in town of raiders and drifters who preyed on isolated homesteads. Alone, she was an easy mark. With him there, the danger felt both lessened and complicated. His presence might protect her, but it might also draw eyes that would otherwise pass by. Later that day she rode into town for supplies, Caleb following at a respectful distance. The streets buzzed with quiet talk as they passed. Some glanced at them together, curiosity sharp as a blade. Others turned away, unwilling to involve themselves. At the general store, a woman she barely knew offered polite words edged with warning. "People notice things," she said. "In places like this they always do." The ride home felt longer. The weight of unspoken judgment pressed down on them both. Caleb kept his gaze forward, but she sensed his discomfort. He had spent years avoiding towns, avoiding ties that bound too tightly. Now he found himself caught in a web of shared glances and whispered thoughts. That night, as the fire burned low, she spoke of her childhood, of a family lost to fever back east, of the road west, taken out of hope and necessity. He listened without interrupting, the way men of the frontier learned to listen when words were rare and precious. In turn, he spoke of the range, of nights spent under open sky, of friendships that ended at the edge of dawn. Each confession drew them closer, even as it raised new walls of caution. Outside, the land lay quiet, but tension lingered like the scent of rain on dry earth. Somewhere beyond the hills, unseen forces moved, indifferent to their fragile peace. As sleep finally claimed them, the sense of something waiting just beyond the firelight refused to fade, promising that the trials ahead would test more than their strength. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm, like a song remembered but never fully sung. Morning brought chores and quiet cooperation. Evening brought firelight and the careful sharing of space. Yet beneath the surface, unease stirred, fed by the land and by feelings neither dared speak aloud. Caleb rode the perimeter each dawn, checking fences and watching the hills. The tracks near the creek appeared again, faint but troubling, and once he found a length of rope caught on a branch where it did not belong. He said little, not wanting to trouble her, but his eyes stayed sharp, his hand never far from his rifle. Frontier life demanded vigilance, and Western survival often meant trusting instinct over comfort. She sensed his tension even when he tried to hide it. At times, she would catch him studying the horizon, jaw set, as if measuring the distance between safety and disaster. It reminded her too much of the look her husband had worn in his final weeks, when sickness had crept into his bones and the future had grown uncertain. The memory tightened her chest and she turned away, unwilling to walk that path again. One afternoon, while mending a torn blanket, she heard voices drifting from the road. She stepped outside to see two riders approaching, their coats dark and their faces shaded by low hats. Caleb met them halfway, his posture calm, but guarded. She could not hear the words exchanged, only the edge in their tones. After a time, the riders turned back, leaving dust and unease behind. "They were asking about land," Caleb said when he returned. "About who lives here," her heart thudded. "And you told them?" "Only that it's occupied and not for sale," he hesitated. "Men like that don't ask out of curiosity." From that moment on, the cabin no longer felt as isolated. The wide plains that once offered freedom now seemed to leave them exposed. She slept lightly, waking at every sound, while Caleb took to keeping watch after dark. Once, she found him sitting on the step near midnight, the moon casting silver across his face. Without thinking, she brought him a cup of coffee. Their hands brushed again, and this time neither pulled away at once. In that quiet moment, the truth pressed close. She saw the kindness in him, the steady strength shaped by loss and loyalty. He saw her resilience, the way she carried grief without letting it break her spirit. The feeling between them was no longer a distant stirring, but a living thing, fragile and warm. It frightened them both. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally, voice low. "Not like this." She understood what he meant. Every shared look felt like a betrayal, even though the man they both mourned was gone. She nodded, though the thought of him leaving hollowed her chest. The frontier had taken enough from her already. Could it not leave this one comfort untouched? Days later, she rode into town alone. Caleb had insisted on staying behind to repair the barn, but she sensed another reason in his eyes, a need to create distance. In the old west town, news traveled faster than the river in spring. She heard it in half-spoken warnings and sharp glances. A preacher's wife spoke of propriety. A shopkeeper mentioned men gathering near the saloon, talking about land claims and easy pickings. As she mounted her horse to leave, she caught sight of a young native boy watching from across the street. He had been part of a small group that camped near the hills, trading hides for flour. He met her gaze and then pointed subtly toward the north road, shaking his head. The gesture lingered in her thoughts as she rode home, a silent warning woven into a larger Native American tale of watchfulness and respect for signs. That night she told Caleb what she had seen and heard. He listened, expression grave. "We may need help," he said. Or at least a plan? The idea of involving others filled her with dread. She had learned to survive by keeping her world small. Yet the dangers pressing in were larger than pride. She agreed, though uncertainty shadowed her words. The next morning they worked together repairing a fence near the creek. The sun beat down and sweat streaked dust across their skin. At one point, she lost her footing on the muddy bank, and Caleb caught her before she fell. For a heartbeat, she rested against him, his arms steady around her waist. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of their breathing and the warmth between them. She pulled back quickly, color rising in her cheeks. He stepped away as well, eyes dark with feeling he dared not name. The closeness left them both shaken. Love felt possible in that moment, as real as the land beneath their boots, yet fear followed close behind. To love again was to risk losing everything once more. That evening, a rider arrived with news from town. A claim jumper had been found dead near the river, and talk of retaliation spread like wildfire. Men were arming themselves, choosing sides, and the law was thin and distant. The frontier thrived on justice shaped by anger and fear, and innocent lives were often caught in between. Caleb knew this world too well. He had seen how quickly violence grew from whispers. He felt the pull of responsibility, the urge to protect her and the land she fought to keep. Yet he also knew that staying might draw trouble straight to her door. As night fell, they sat by the fire, the weight of unspoken choices heavy between them. She stared into the flames, thinking of her husband, of the vows they had spoken beneath an open sky. She wondered what he would want for her now. Caleb watched her in silence, torn between desire and duty. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the sense of change. Somewhere beyond the hills, men gathered, plans forming that would soon touch their lives. Inside the cabin, two hearts hovered on the edge of a decision neither was ready to make, bound by grief, hope, and the unforgiving truth of the frontier. The night carried no peace. Wind pressed hard against the cabin walls, rattling the loose shutter and forcing its way through every crack. Caleb rose before dawn, restless, his mind fixed on the news from town. Men gathering, tempers burning, eyes turning toward lonely stretches of land like this one. He had seen it before. Trouble always came riding in when people believed they could take without consequence. She woke to the sound of him pulling on his coat. For a moment, fear gripped her, sharp and sudden. The thought of him leaving without a word struck deeper than she expected. She sat up, watching his shadow move across the room. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "To check the ridge," he said. "If anyone's coming, I want to know before they reach the creek." She nodded, though worry tightened her chest. The frontier had taught her the cost of waiting too long. Still, she could not bring herself to ask him to stay. The line between them remained unspoken, yet it shaped every choice. By mid-morning, the sky darkened again, clouds rolling low and heavy. She worked near the barn, repairing a gate that had split in the storm. Her thoughts drifted to her husband, to the last promise he had made her. He had sworn to protect her, no matter what. That promise had been buried with him, yet its echo lived on, now carried by another man standing watch on the hills. Caleb returned near noon, his expression grim. "I saw riders," he said. "3, maybe 4. They're keeping distance, watching," her breath caught. "Do they know we're here?" "They do now?" The words settled between them like a sentence passed. She felt the old fear rise, the same helplessness she had known when sickness had taken hold of her husband. But this time, fear sparked something else as well, resolve. "We can't run," she said. "This land is all I have left." Caleb looked at her, seeing the strength that had carried her through loss and hunger. "I know, that's why I'm staying." The certainty in his voice sent a tremor through her. Relief and dread tangled together. To have him stand with her meant safety, but it also meant danger would follow. She nodded once, accepting what could not be undone. They spent the afternoon preparing. Caleb moved with practiced ease, checking the rifle, setting what few defenses the land allowed. She gathered supplies, hands steady despite the storm inside her chest. At one point she paused, clutching a folded shirt that still smelled faintly of her husband. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced them back. There would be time for grief later, if later came at all. As evening fell, a single rider approached from the south. He reined in near the fence, his face half hidden beneath a scarf. Caleb stepped forward, his stance calm but ready. The man spoke of claims and boundaries of land that could be taken if no one strong enough stood to keep it. His words were smooth, but his eyes were hard. "This place is spoken for," Caleb replied. "You'd best ride on." The rider smiled thinly. "We'll see." When he left, the silence felt heavier than before. She watched Caleb's back as he returned to her side, the firelight casting long shadows across the yard. "They'll come," she said. "Yes," he answered. "And when they do, it won't be just for the land." Night deepened, and with it came a sense of finality. They sat together inside the cabin, the fire burning low. She poured 2 cups of coffee, her hands trembling now despite her efforts. Caleb noticed and reached out, covering her hand with his own. This time, neither pretended it was an accident. "I won't lose another," she whispered, the words breaking free at last. "I don't know if I could bear it." He felt the weight of her fear, and his own rose to meet it. He had spent years riding away from ties, believing distance was the only safety. Now he saw the cost of that belief, felt it in the warmth of her hand and the quiet courage in her eyes. "I can't promise what the land won't take," he said softly, "but I can promise I won't leave you to face it alone." The confession settled between them, fragile and powerful. For a moment the world beyond the cabin faded, and only the truth of their shared resolve remained. She leaned closer, her head resting briefly against his shoulder. It was a simple touch, yet it carried all the longing and restraint of a love not yet claimed. Outside, hoofs sounded in the distance. Not close enough to act, but close enough to warn. Caleb stiffened, listening. She straightened as well, fear sharpening her senses. The frontier had drawn its line, and there would be no stepping back now. Later, as the fire died to embers, Caleb prepared to take first watch. She insisted on staying awake with him, unable to bear the thought of sleeping while danger crept closer. They spoke quietly, sharing memories and regrets, words they might never have spoken if not pressed by time. She told him of the night her husband died, of the helpless rage she still carried. He told her of the people he had lost on the trail, of choices he wished he could undo. Each confession drew them closer, yet the knowledge of what waited outside kept them apart, cautious even in closeness. Near dawn the sound came again, clearer now. Multiple riders, moving slow and deliberate. Caleb rose, gripping his rifle, his jaw set. She stood as well, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the door. "If it comes to it," he said, voice low, "you take the back trail to the creek. Don't look back." Her chest tightened at the thought. Separation had taken too much from her already. She shook her head. "I won't leave you." He met her gaze, seeing the depth of her resolve. There was no time to argue. Outside, shadows moved near the fence, shapes against the pale light of early morning. They stood together, the past and the future colliding in that single moment. The cabin, the land, the fragile bond they had barely begun to acknowledge, all balanced on the edge of what came next. As the first rider dismounted and stepped forward, the air seemed to hold its breath, and so did they. The rider stepped forward, boots sinking into the damp earth, his companions lingering behind him like shadows unsure of their shape. Morning light crept over the hills, pale and uncertain, revealing hard faces and tired eyes. These were not men driven by courage so much as by hunger and rumor, drawn to the edges of civilization where law thinned and temptation grew strong. Caleb stood firm, rifle lowered but ready, his presence steady as a fence post set deep in the ground. She remained beside him, her fear held in check by resolve. The rider spoke again of claims and opportunity, of land left undefended. His words rang hollow in the quiet air. "This land has a keeper," Caleb said, "and it has a past. Best you remember that." Before the rider could answer, a sound rose from the creek behind them. Hooves, many of them, moving with purpose. The men stiffened, glancing back. From the line of cottonwoods emerged a small group of riders, some white, some native, moving together with calm certainty. At their head rode the young native boy she had seen in town, now older in bearing, his gaze sharp and steady. They reined in near the fence, forming a quiet line of witness. No weapons were raised, none were needed. The message was clear. This place was not alone, not forgotten. It was watched and it was respected. The lead rider from the group spoke, his voice even. "This land is settled. Trouble here will find no shelter." The claim seekers shifted, unease breaking their earlier confidence. One muttered under his breath. Another spat into the dirt. After a long moment, the first rider nodded stiffly. Without another word, they turned and mounted up, retreating the way they had come, leaving only churned earth and broken intent behind them. Silence followed, heavy but blessed. Caleb exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his shoulders. She felt her knees weaken and reached out, gripping his arm for support. He steadied her without comment, his touch firm and reassuring. The riders who had come to their aid dismounted. The native boy approached her, offering a small nod. "The land remembers," he said simply. "So do we." She thanked them, her voice thick with emotion. They did not linger, mounting again and disappearing into the morning, leaving behind a sense of quiet strength, a reminder that survival in the West often depended on bonds unseen until needed most. As the sun rose higher, light spilled across the homestead, revealing the scars of past storms and the promise of new days. Caleb set the rifle aside and turned to her. For the first time since he arrived, the weight of watchfulness lifted from his eyes. "It's over," he said. She nodded, tears finally slipping free. Relief washed through her, followed by something warmer and deeper. Gratitude, not just for safety, but for the man who had stood with her when it mattered most. They spent the day repairing what little damage had been done, working side by side in a silence that felt no longer strained. Each shared glance carried a softness that had been waiting, patient and true. When the sun dipped low once more, painting the sky in familiar colors, they sat together on the cabin steps. "I thought I'd be alone forever," she said quietly. "After he died, I closed myself off. I didn't think there was room for anything else." Caleb listened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I spent years running," he admitted, "from places, from people, from the idea that staying might be worth the risk." She turned to him then, the past no longer a wall but a foundation. "What do you want now?" He met her eyes, seeing not just the widow she had been, but the woman she was becoming. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "If you'll have me." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of every mile he had ridden and every loss she had endured. She reached for his hand, her grip sure. "I would," she said. They did not speak of replacing what had been lost. The Old West had taught them both that love did not erase grief. It lived alongside it, honoring what came before while making room for what might yet be. In the days that followed, Caleb stayed, not as a visitor or a guard, but as a partner. Together they returned to town, this time riding side by side. The whispers faded, replaced by nods of respect. The preacher's wife offered a gentle smile. The shopkeeper spoke of supplies and seasons ahead. The land claim was reaffirmed, strengthened by witnesses and shared understanding. Children from a neighboring homestead visited often, their laughter filling the cabin once more. She found herself smiling at the sound, her heart healing in ways she had not thought possible. Caleb taught them to ride, to mend, to listen to the land. She taught them stories, some her own, some passed down, weaving together a tapestry of frontier life and forgotten trails. Seasons turned as they always did. The land remained harsh, demanding respect and effort, but it gave back in quiet ways. Crops took root, the creek ran clear. The cabin grew warmer, not just with firelight, but with shared purpose. On an evening much like the one when Caleb first stood watching her hammer broken boards, she paused in her work and looked at him across the yard. He leaned against the fence post, a familiar sight now, his presence no longer uncertain. "You're watching again?" she said, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Making sure the boards hold," he replied, smiling. They stood together then, hands entwined, gazing out across the wide plains. The past no longer loomed like a shadow, but rested gently behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty, as it always did in the West, but also hope earned through hardship. As stars appeared one by one, she rested her head against his shoulder. The land was quiet, the kind of quiet that spoke of peace rather than loneliness. In that stillness they found what the frontier rarely gave freely, but never denied those who endured.